I saw a video of a bunch of people protesting, and there were people in a nearby bar just going about their day and ignoring the situation. And it got me to thinking about the state we are, where we have the world's information at our fingertips, but the availability of things like AI are making us increasingly numb to the amount we're able to educate and improve ourselves. So many of us, I think, are stuck in a cycle of dopamine addiction where you know, nicotine addiction, things that used to not be an issue in the younger generation, are having a resurgence. Social media addiction and young people isolating themselves or being agoraphobic are new issues that are returning because so many of us don't know how to navigate this brave new world we're living in. And I was saying on a social media site the other day how I drank the Kool-Aid and purchased something from Shein, which is a notoriously unethical website. And I hesitate to say my biggest mistakes out on the internet for everyone to consume. But I find it funny because in some circles of young people, buying fast fashion and large hauls of overconsumption and micro trends is a normalized thing. It's a normalized part of youth. Buy your identity, buy whoever you are. I felt hesitant to say on my social media that was chock full of fellow activists and people who thrift and make their own clothes and participate in mutual aid that it would be okay to admit I had knowingly done something that was technically unethical. Is it less unethical if we know everyone is out here doing it? I described to my friends recently how boycotting brands due to a variety of social and political issues has kind of fizzled out as we realize these issues are very much pervasive and our individual influence may not feel like it's as amplified. I was describing as well how with things like people using AI daily, it can be hard to limit your own use when you say, well, that guy's doing it. I may be wrong in this, but I think we need to find a personal ground where we can limit our consumption of these things, but also not beat ourselves up if we do partake in them once in a while. I think with everything in today's society, we have to ask ourselves, what is the desired outcome? Like, what am I trying to achieve? And I think it's really difficult because I view myself as a public figure just having social media and broadcasting to the public. Yet many celebrities who have a way larger influence than me probably are not feeling concern for things like supporting a large corporation, buying fast fashion, or using AI. But I think it's very important in this society to cope with the constant juxtaposition of things that make no sense but exist simultaneously in the same American vacuum we're living in. We need to be able to sit with ourselves and ultimately feel like we are not part of the problem, and not in a way like cognitive dissonance, in a genuine way. Like knowing you did what you could and you pushed yourself to grow, but you ultimately accepted that you are a human. I think this narrative happens a lot too, where people say prioritize mental health, and that's important, but there is a level of awareness I think we all must be burdened to have. In the book, The Ones Who Walk Away from Amalas, or short story, I should say, a town called Amalas exists that's a utopian society where everyone is happy and all of their needs are met. They coexist peacefully and joyfully. However, this is all at the expense of one child who is living in squalor and torture and horrible conditions. Those who walk away from Amalas are the ones who decide that the child matters. Despite the good of the group, it is unacceptable for even one to be living in these conditions. So the ones who walk away from Amalas are ultimately those who cannot take it. They cannot partake in the cognitive dissonance required to become accustomed to their society. I see these themes with, for example, it reminds me of the music video for Black Hole Sun, the 90s song, where it shows this utopian American suburban neighborhood and the end of the world happening and all of these exaggerated situations and caricatures of American society, like the religious people saying the end is near, while people can simultaneously be happy in this thriving, consumer, peaceful, sectioned off white picket fence neighborhood. And I think if you say to yourself recently, due to a plethora of events going on, that the American dream has crumbled, you're also late to that, because I think, by the perspective of many, we have been the bad guy for quite a few years. And I think it's important to acknowledge that just because it no longer feels safe for us doesn't mean it's always been safe for everyone else. I think we've sat in comfort for many years being the victor of most world conflicts, being told we are the most powerful, almost like a father that's always going to come home and tuck you in when you're afraid of a nightmare, you know? It is, we will win. We have these nukes, we have this money, we are the leader of the free world. And I think it's gotten to a point where we falter in that cognitive dissonance, even the most patriotic of us or the most asleep of us. And I think it's very important that while easing that discomfort you feel with increasing your consciousness, you become mindful that that does not limit the harm done unto others. I think the suffering done to many people, for example, another thing similar and unrelated, I think looks. I think for a while we did not acknowledge looks mattered that much. Like, there was this golden era of like the mid 2000s where we just worried about who you were. And that was really the millennial optimism era, in my opinion, where we all thought we could coexist in creativity and pleasure of youth. But nowadays, I think we are fully drinking the Kool-Aid that looks do matter. And I find it interesting, the resurgence of, to me, it started with the glow ups, you know, when people started saying glow ups, and not like the original root of the word from most likely communities of color saying, oh, so and so glowed up. But when it became like glow up guide, all this on YouTube, you know, and then I think it became an extreme where now we have the Looksmaxxing, and this is tied in with traditional roles of femininity and masculinity. And I think it's ultimately kind of leading us back into this isolated nuclear family example where they don't want your community to be the people around you who might be different backgrounds. They want your community to be your husband and you stay home because you're a wife. And I saw some excellent discourse online saying how the pink Pilates princess archetype is a perfect socialization of traditional femininity. Like, you go to a workout class with other women, there are no men there, you go home, you know. And I think gym culture, lifting culture for women is a bit, in my opinion, inherently subversive, because it's encouraging women to take up more space, be more masculine. You know, when I go to the gym and lift, I get calluses on my hands. You know, I'm lifting as much as the men. I'm in these spaces, and I think sometimes women need to demand to take up space. So many girls I know have gym anxiety, and they don't want to use the machines because a lot of men are kind of puffing their chest and taking up the equipment, taking a long time. You know, women don't want to speak up in these male-dominated spaces. And I think one of the most radical things you can do is take up space unapologetically, because you have a right to be there. But I think I'm so fascinated by these creators like Clavicular who basically say, yeah, looks are everything. And on top of that, there are people at the top of that hierarchy and people at the bottom. And you need to do what you can to be at the top of it, or you're cooked. And I think it's so interesting, too, that a lot of males are internalizing these roles that they've created for women. Like, I don't think a lot of women, I mean, some, but I don't think the women I know are worried about a man's appearance. I think they're worried about his character, communication, because ultimately female friendships are so fun and fulfilling, or, you know, being a cat lady, because women value their peace. They value their emotions. We're very much emotional creatures. We're creatures of comfort. And I think, too, just we could benefit from having more female voices, because females have a different perspective. There's another story I could tie this into, but I forget the name, but it was basically about how from a woman's perspective you could see something you couldn't from a man's. It was like a classic short story. And it reminds me of the plot of, I believe it's Legally Blonde, where they solve a murder because they're like, you had this stuff in your hair to have a perm. It takes long. You know, and as a girl, I could say if someone said they were dyeing their hair and then they immediately went and did something, it would take way longer. You'd have to wash it out, you know? And I think this expertise that women come with is often thrown under the rug, and I think even in like educational settings or social settings, the expertise that people from marginalized communities come with is totally written off. But I don't think we can find solutions that help without the voices of many. And this is where I do become slightly a doomer, because I think that there's no way the goal can be to coexist with the amount we're still silencing people from marginalized communities. To me, the goal is to maintain systems of power. And this is really where other people perceive the U.S. not as warmly as we do towards our own country. And I think from an outside perspective, it can be very hard to view us as a good guy at this point. If you're, being torn up by us. But I think it's very interesting how algorithms are selling us this belief that we have got to compete. What's so unique about you? It sneers at us as we are an average person with average flaws. You are not the exception. You're not, and I don't think we were all put here to Looksmaxx and be perfection. And now I simultaneously feel the pressure and desire to succumb to those roles as a young person, because I think, well, why would you not want to be your best self? It reminds me of the song Popular by Nada Surf. Like, if you want to be the biggest fish in your pond, wash your hair, talk to girls, be popular, be on the football team. And I don't think anyone willingly wants to sit out from the rewards, the fruits of these kind of things. So it's a really hard dynamic. It's hard to make people feel like they are enough while simultaneously, feeling like we're not enough. And I think we were never meant to be consumed by the masses online. I think we were meant to be loved by those in our community and our family, and I see this being from a smaller town and then moving into bigger spaces, like, and especially going to a university where there's so much affluence. And it's astonishing how there's such is the word hegemony of people. Like, everyone has their Apple computer, their Lululemon clothes, their $150 blonde highlights. Their fitness is a symbol of their affluence. Their quiet, stoic nature is a symbol of their affluence, which I think is so interesting how affluent American culture, and I guess of other countries too, but it really evokes this stoicism and this quiet, and you need to not show your cards. And I find it interesting because typically cultures we associate with being lower in socioeconomic status are the ones that create most of the fun and enjoyable cultural products, music, dancing, laughing, partying, yummy food items. And we associate these bland, sanitized versions of human life with the upper class. And I've noticed being in spaces like fitness studios that are typically for the affluent and meant to be a networking playground for them. If you show up looking like me, everyone's kind of like, and no one can tell you you're not supposed to be there, but it's conveyed, And I think the same goes for other people from marginalized groups. And I've joked before that having colorful hair will make you aware of privileges you had that you wouldn't have if you didn't look the way you do. Because I just don't think, I think people love to judge by appearance. And it's very easy for people from these dominant groups who might even act as oppressors of other groups or did in the past, if you aren't an oppressor and you want to convey that. But I think it's really interesting that if you are never looked at as the other, you would not know what that's like. Because when I had normal hair color, I would receive the treatment of looking like someone's daughter, someone's family member, getting, oh, it's okay if I'm acting kind of chaotic in public, or if I'm ever, if I'm lost, or if something's not working and I'm kind of freaking out, I get treated as like, they're there. When you have colorful hair, or if you belong to a group where you are visibly another, or maybe if you have like piercings or tattoos or something, I think you do not receive that benefit, where I think people look at you as a danger, or as a deviation from their norms. So they are not capable of feeling that empathy to you. Because, I've noticed like with medical care since I've looked like this. I felt like I was maybe not treated with the utmost empathy, where I treated better. And this is why I think Looksmaxxing has become so popular, because the idea that you can actually hack this broken system by putting in effort, and that we can almost look down upon those who do not succeed at the system, or who are not able to thwart that negative attention. I think we're very good at telling those people, well, if you just went to the gym, you wouldn't have these problems, and I've never been like very much overweight, but even becoming thinner within being a smaller person is so rewarded. And I think although men get similar treatment, I think it's a lot more exaggerated for women, where we have just been socialized so much of our worth is on our appealingness to others. And it's very concerning, because obviously I think fitness is important. It's good for your mental health. And I think that's something that is very slept on, like not to look better, but to feel better. I know everyone says that, but like genuinely, a lot of people are out here in our country and they're very upset, they're distressed, they have pent up energy, they don't know what to do with it. And you need to move. You need to have flowing blood. You need to have flowing of your lymphatic system and proper drainage, proper circulation. But it's also astonishing to me how many people in the fitness community are toxic, and so much of the motivation, and I myself get complacent, and I remind myself of how nice it feels to be strong and have muscles and sit up straight. But I simultaneously am upset at these posts I see that are like, if you do these many push-ups, you'll wear a dress this summer. If you do none, you'll be wearing, pants. And these things that just subtly reinforce, and not so subtly, how much people in bodies we do not deem attractive by our standards are just worthless. And it goes as far to say, I see a lot of posts online of like larger women doing these workout classes that are meant to be fun, like drumming on a ball or something kind of obscure, where it's not a traditional like CrossFit class, but it's meant that people who are less in shape can move their muscles, move their body, get used to activity. And I, as a person that got into lifting through walking around the block and being overly out of shape, resonate with the theme of needing to ease yourself into exercise, especially in these spaces that quietly convey you are not welcome unless you fit their mold. And so it's astonishing to me when I see these comments on social media videos of women doing something silly, or like those classes where they run and they're like suspended in the air and they're flying through the air, and all the comments are like 5 sets of whatchamacallits, and they're all putting these women down for trying to improve their level of fitness. And obviously I'm not reinventing the wheel by saying this, but it's astonishing how much we convey that it's not about your fitness level. If we truly wanted people to get in shape, I don't think we would treat them so harshly. So I just think it's very important we understand there's a lot of intersections in our society nowadays that do not make any sense. And I think you need to survive this by not giving in to cognitive dissonance, but having pride for yourself for the things you do to resist these unnatural lifestyles. Like, if you get up and move today, instead of going on an app that's so addictive and banking on keeping you addictive to sell you advertisements, good for you. To me, I gave into buying something from an unethical company because of cost-saving reasons. And as bad as I feel about the existence of companies like this, I'm aware there are people out here splurging on microtrend hauls every week. And that doesn't make it okay, but I'm also aware that I think we need a long-term boycott and limit of these kind of unethical brands and corporations, and I think it's a marathon, not a sprint. So, if I have to answer to the purchases I've made from that site of things I knew I was going to use, I think that's okay. AI, we're running out of water. It's limiting our critical thinking skills. I saw a comedy video where a man said he used AI to ask which seat in his car would be the most comfortable. And everyone was saying, why didn't you just sit in them to see? And I got to a point yesterday where I was thinking, well, I really need to think of something creative to gift this person for a birthday. Either I will use a fast fashion website to purchase it cheaply, or I would probably have to use AI to brainstorm making it. And I know you could just say, oh, we'll use your creativity, which I would say for the majority of things like writing an email. But I think it's a matter of sustainability. Like on a daily basis, you need to have the critical thinking skills to write an email because you will write many emails. I think if it's a once situation, like you need to think of something that's appropriate for a really special gift. Not every gift, you know? And this is where I really think we're not going to solve these issues by demonizing people online. There's so many issues that all fall under this umbrella of parasocial relationships and the internet changing the way we perceive other human beings. And frankly, we just need to lock in. Like, we've got to read more, we've got to discuss more, we've got to ask ourselves when we see new things that challenge our perspective, why does this make me uncomfortable? I saw a thing online where people are saying it's toxic to tell women to divorce their husband if he's a bad partner. And it's like, it's not toxic. If a partner is abusive, you must go. That might cause you cognitive dissonance, but everything we've achieved is through a bit of resistance. Do you think in the past, before we had things like AI or even search engines or phones to help us, how did we do anything? Through resistance. I think resistance is what makes us human, and we should not strive to become so numb to the point that we are equivalent to an AI.